Former detainees once held at a privately run immigrant detention center in Aurora have filed a federal lawsuit citing exploitation. The suit represents up to 60,000 people detained at the Geo Group-owned facility over 10 years and challenges the $1 a day compensation offered in exchange for maintenance-based jobs throughout the facility. The 1,500-bed center reported a $2.3 billion revenue in 2016 with an adjusted $163 million in adjusted net income. David, as one of our two esteemed attorneys at the table, as lawsuits go, how does this look from the outset, and how might it impact the immigration discussion in Colorado?
Well, it looks very plausible at the outset because it's already survived the first attempt by the defendant to get rid of it, and the defendant's now appealing that class action certification. Remember, these detention centers are not for people who have been convicted of immigration crimes, and they're not people who have been determined that they should be deported because they're illegal aliens. It's people for whom there are credible charges about that, but no final determination. So they still have, even though they're being detained because they're a flight risk, there is still some presumption of innocence there. So when you say you can either do the maintenance of the facility for $1 a day, or we can put you in solitary confinement, that does seem to get close to what the 13th Amendment prohibits, which is involuntary servitude, except after conviction of a crime. It has huge national implications because this is far from the only private facility nationwide that does this. In terms of what it says about immigration, I don't think anything. I mean, you can be for illegal immigration or against it, but if we're going to have any immigration laws at all, they're going to be detention centers for people who violate whatever laws do exist. But the question is, are those centers themselves, even when dealing with people, maybe 95% of whom turn out to be illegal aliens, they still have to be run in accordance with the U.S. Constitution.
Penn, you are our other esteemed lawyer at the table with QTAC Rock. As you look at this lawsuit, at least it reminded me about the election last year where Colorado had the opportunity to take the word slavery out of its own constitution. Now, it didn't have to do anything with the 1860s. It had to do with something like this, where in prisons, would this be considered something? Now, this isn't slavery, but it brings up that conversation. So do you think that will echo with this lawsuit if it continues?
I think it will. You know, we have had a national problem with the explosive growth in the private prison, private detention center industry for years. When I spent time in the legislature, part of why I spent so much time trying to rewrite sentencing laws and decriminalize certain activity is because as a state, we knew we were going to run out of money and we were going to run out of dirt with the way we were investing in these private prisons and our state-owned and operated prisons. It's just not sustainable. And the problem you have here is now, and David made a point that's very important for people to understand, many people in these detention facilities haven't been convicted of anything. They're being held pending consideration of whether they've committed a crime. What do you do with the people who are imposed, who are placed under these conditions? They're working for $1 a day or maybe spend time in solitary confinement, and it's determined in a hearing that they did nothing wrong, that they're properly documented or there was a paperwork error. How do you make up for the life they've lost under these circumstances? And it's going to have national implications because this is a cottage industry that has just exploded around the country, and it's wrong. It's just wrong the way they function.
Noel, this is hitting some of the sweet spots. You're the crime reporter of the Denver Post. This is talking about not necessarily, well, there's a crime involved, but again, as Penn and David both mentioned, not any sort of judgments. People aren't serving time. What do you make of the lawsuit? We're going to hear more about it.
Oh, definitely. And when I was researching this issue, one thing that's interesting too is the people in these detention facilities have no control over how long they are there. So NPR reported in February, I believe, that there are 300 immigration judges in the country that do these deportation hearings. They each have a backlog of cases of about 1,800. And the Trump administration wants to add Border Patrol and ICE agents. So that would theoretically mean that more people will be sent to these detention centers. So now we're going to have this incredible backlog. People are just going to be sitting here, and now we're going to tell them you have to go to work for $1 a day or $1 an hour, or you could go to solitary confinement, which, by the way, solitary confinement, like more and more corrections experts are just saying that is not a good idea, even for the most hardened criminals who've been convicted for something. And these folks are facing a deportation hearing. It's not necessarily like they're not violent, or they're probably moms and dads and construction workers and hotel maids. And I actually have a guy who calls me from the Centennial Center daily. I'm afraid to even mention this because if he sees it, it'll encourage him more. He was convicted back in the run-up to the Iraq War on some kind of espionage charges, served his time in federal prison, is now waiting in Centennial for deportation to, I think, Lebanon. And he's been there for months, just sitting and waiting. It's been ordered to be deported, and so he's just waiting. So there's like, he's like a very educated man. So there's like all kinds of people of all nationalities just sitting here waiting for something to happen. So this lawsuit, especially with Immigration Day, this isn't going to fade from the public's consciousness.
Natasha, 5280 and yourself have done a lot of different stories, whether it's about prisons or immigration, everything in between. Your take?
Well, what's interesting here is we've talked about the popularity, sort of the rise of this privatized system. 65% of detainees are now in this type of detention center, this private detention center. So it's a huge part of the population, of this particular population that's being held in these private centers. These private centers are also big business. So the company involved in this, I believe they were the first to get a big contract to build a new detention center under Trump's administration. And it dates back to Obama's administration before that too. So there's a long history, and it's potentially only getting bigger. And I think that's why it's so timely right now. There's actually a similar case in California with a different company. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few weeks, even months, we start to see more cases across the country.